Hello and welcome to the Aegex Webinar. Today we are hearing from Darrell Knight with FutureOn. First, I'd like to direct you all to your control panel where you will be able to ask questions of the panelists by clicking on the question section. And there you can write in your question and send privately to the organizers. And at the end of the 30-minute presentation, we will open up the floor to these questions and read them out loud for the panelists to answer. If we do not get to your question during this question and answer session, we will email you privately afterwards. First, we'd like to hear from the CEO of Aegex Technologies, Thomas Venchilette. And Tom will be introducing our webinar for today. Tom?
Thanks, Lee. Thanks, everybody, for joining this month. As with all of our webinars, we try to feature a broad range of different types of partners that we believe will contribute in a significant way or different ways of driving digital transformation in the industries we serve. And one thing I think we consistently see, particularly in the oil and gas industry, is old processes don't easily transfer to a mobile or distributed environment. I think one of the issues behind that happens to be the nature of how legacy information is developed, particularly in engineering environments. So with our goal of connecting people and facilities in a real-time manner, to drive operational excellence, to improve efficiency, to improve productivity, taking those legacy engineering processes and moving them into a digital world becomes an issue. And when we connected with FutureOn, we saw this as a really tremendous, absolutely industry-leading method of doing that. Starting with design documents and the initial planning of undersea systems and how oil is captured and brought to the surface and so forth. A very cumbersome process, but by starting here, it actually enabled all of that legacy information to transfer into an environment where easily that could be displayed to people in the field, people offshore, people onshore. And it created that very easy transition to then an operational environment, particularly an IoT environment, where now we have sensors across everything, and that's feeding that same system in a live environment. So it's taking that easy, quick step of improving a current process and then setting our customers up for a great long-range success. So with that, I want to introduce Darrell, and Darrell, go for it. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate this opportunity to talk a little bit about how we partner together, bringing sort of software and hardware together into a solution for the oil and gas industry. FutureOn, just a little background. FutureOn's a software company. We develop cloud-based solutions. For those of you who may or may not know what a cloud solution is, it's basically it runs in your browser. You don't download any software to your desktop. Everything runs in the cloud. So everything runs through a browser environment. And it's an incredibly secure a way to operate your software solutions. And we have a number of companies, both service providers as well as operators, who use our software products for some of the things I'm going to be talking about today. As a company, we've been in business under different guises for about 20 years. In the oil and gas industry, primarily providing visual services to the industry. And we've fairly recently spun off the software company as we're investing deeply into digital technologies. So what has changed over the years? Of course, what's driving the current desire to go digital, or the transformation? And the obvious answer, of course, is the industry is changing significantly, and I think the drop in the price of oil over the last in the few years, the 2 years between 2015 and 2017, was a big wake-up call, which the industry decided we have to change the way we operate. We can't be so dependent on people. We have to bring in new process that we can optimize and automate some of the ways that we're doing business. Of course, now the price of oil's gone up, and companies are being profitable. And the good news, though, is that we're seeing that stability hasn't changed the opinion. People aren't going back to their old ways. They're starting to look at digital technology as a way to be competitive. So the wake-up call was good. It allowed new technology to be implemented and to be brought into play. And many companies who are taking advantage of it are certainly increasing the way that they are competing in the industry. So let's talk a little bit about what is digital. So digital is a term that's used out there, and it means many different things to many different people. And there's a lot of terms that get thrown around, bandied around in terms of things like AR and artificial intelligence and cloud and machine learning. VR is another one. And they're sort of kind of thrown out there in many cases in sort of a random fashion. But really, at the end of the day, it's all about data, as Tom was talking about. The majority of data that exists within enterprises, and this includes the industries that we're in here, is unused. It sits in a drawer, it sits in a spreadsheet, maybe on a Word document, and really doesn't get used for anything. But there's a huge amount of knowledge that sits within that database, within that set of data that needs to be brought together. And if we can bring that together and then apply these digital solutions, we end up resolving many of the problems that you may have had to deal with in the past. So, you know, in this example, I'm bringing both historical data. You have documents, you may have spreadsheets, you may have a database of information that you want to bring in, as well as new data, real-time data captured through IoT devices and various sensors. Bringing all that together into your big data environment, your big database, and it could be multiple databases as well, and then apply smart analytics and learning to it, and then connect it to a dashboard via what we call an API, an application programming interface, to present this digital environment in a real-time usable fashion. And we call it the digital twin. In our case, we're very focused on offshore. So I call it the offshore digital twin or the field twin. That's the focus that we have going forward in our environment. So bringing real data, as well, existing data, as well as live data together into a usable environment. So there are, from our perspective as a software developer, there are three areas that, if you like, processes that need to be digitized using this concept of an offshore digital twin. And they start really from the planning stages, well planning, understanding where your wells are going to be drilled, using offset data to understand your geological structure that you're going to drill in. Field development, so once your wells have been identified, your reservoirs have been analyzed, then developing the field itself, and then ultimately being able to use the field, the digital field within your operations. One of the keys to making this work is collaboration. And many companies are now creating associations and alliances to work together in a much more collaborative way than they have in the past. And being collaborative means communicating better, and decisions are made more quickly, whether it's internally within your organization or with your alliance third-party partners. So let's just kind of run through a few of these examples. Well planning, so some of the digital data we're talking about is reservoir data. You may have huge files that contain reservoir information. You probably have either existing well data, that pre-existing wells that have been drilled, as well as reservoir color maps and other pieces of information that are below the subsea as your starting point for understanding where you're going to be drilling new wells. Then your field development, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but basically being able to create or be able to access a digital toolkit or a toolbox of information that are smart data assets that you can use within your field planning to create this smart digital field. And ultimately using tablets and accessing through your cloud-based environment, access to other documents associated with your equipment, as well as live data like IoT data that we've talked about. So those are some of the areas that we're focusing our attention on in terms of building the software. And we're working with Aegex, of course, to make those available within their intrinsically safe technology, whether it's on a tablet or connecting to the IoT devices. So I mentioned centralized digital dashboards. Well, what that means is being able to access all the information from a configured environment. So the dashboard of information, the dashboard of the digital twin, presents the information that you need when you need it, whether it's a domain specialist who needs to provide specialized knowledge to understand a well planning process or a field development process, building in a new riser, or whether it's ultimately in the post-project phase when you're doing maintenance or installation work that you're needing to bring everybody together. So putting everybody, if you like, into the same digital room to access the digital twin becomes the value proposition. And that's where the collaboration component comes in. So your operators, if you're an operator, you need to understand what your EPC partners are doing as they are building out or doing the contract work. What about your marine operations? How is that aligning, as well as with your subsea production system partners across the globe? So the benefit of having a secure cloud-based solution is that it gives you, out of the box, if you like, access to this collaborative environment. So just in general, the short-term benefits of approaching your offshore process through the digital twin story, if you like, is one of the major things, of course, is reducing costs, because you're not having to, you're able to make decisions more quickly. You're able to use and access information at your fingertips. Allows you to work together. So again, I talked about collaboration. Everything is available to all those who need to be part of that process. And by reducing costs and by being able to do things more quickly, obviously you're accelerating the process of getting to first oil. And risk management is also key. You want to be able to make sure the documents they're using are the correct document, the sole version of the truth, if you like, at any point and any time, whether that's at the early stage of the project all the way into operations when you maybe need to pull up a P&ID associated with a particular piece of equipment or anything like that. Making sure all that information is available at your fingertips in the cloud at any time is critical. And that's what the digital twin gives you. So kind of stepping back a little bit, I'm going to talk about how you create the digital twin. What does that look like? So you start, and I mentioned this at the beginning about big data. You start with what data do you have? And that can be all sorts of things in this industry. It can be just your existing archives. It might be mapping data from ArcGIS systems. You may have huge amounts of information either already in a GIS server or available to you through third-party information. As you know, you may know there's lots of information also online that you can access. Things like subsea bathymetry data, the seafloor data that you want to be able to use to make sure you're accurately positioning equipment on the seabed so you can make accurate decisions about say the length of a pipe and everything else associated with it. Reservoir maps, we talked about that for your well planning, existing well paths, your P&IDs, your as-builts, and of course also the actual equipment itself, the asset data. And that's a very critical, the last one there, in fact, is a very critical component, because even if you have all this data, if your assets, your new equipment isn't intelligent, it becomes of very little use. So one of the things that we do as FutureOn is we spend a lot of time making assets smart. So in this case, this is a manifold that's being dragged into a field, but that manifold can be fully configured to the exact specifications that manifold would have in real life. So that's when it starts to become the twin of the real manifold. It starts to represent actually the physical as well as the characteristics of the piece of equipment that you are looking to use in that environment. And that can contain technical information as well as things like costing and other attributes that are important as part of the decision-making process. So I mentioned costing. Costing in a project stage, of course, is always a question you have. And so the digital twin, as you pull it together, at any point during the planning stage, you can understand exactly what your cost is going to be for not just the equipment itself, but also the project as a whole. So you know in this much more competitive environment whether a field you are considering is going to be cost effective at a very early stage. It's not something that you want to wait until later on to send it back to your cost estimating team. You'll know very closely at the very early stage whether this project is something that's viable to you. So given the competitive nature of the world right now, that's a very critical component. Anything in a digital twin environment, you often want to be able to also work in 3D. So the real-time nature of presenting content in 3D, being able to, again, have in smart assets, not just looking at them as a schematic, but as a true 3D representation of the field itself, whether it's on the sea floor, whether it's under the floor or on the surface, being able to visualize exactly how the thing looks in real time helps people, you know, make decisions. It allows you to see something that you would otherwise only see on a spreadsheet. And you can represent these images in whatever way you want, and you can use alerts and other things to be able to present conditions potentially that you need to react to. And then on marine operations, being able to not just plan your installation of a field, for instance, or go out or plan a maintenance process, or even plan a decommissioning, is also being able to see that entire process come to life, if you like, through animations, to be able to see where you may have conflicts associated with your marine operations, or where you may have a period of time when certain vessels at a high day rate are idle because the planning process hasn't come together as you would expect, and so a vessel has arrived early, or something is missing during the marine operations stage, which again, it's all about being more efficient and being able to save money during every part of the process as you go through your field development. And then finally, in the operations stage, so this is a way that we represent real-time data coming in from an IoT device. So in this case, this could be an Aegex IoT device that's detecting both temperature and humidity and identifying very quickly, zooming you into the particular asset, a particular piece of equipment that's exceeded a certain threshold of operation. And then because you've created everything digitally, because this piece of equipment has all the metadata that I talked about earlier, all the intelligence, all the specifications, you can respond to that and immediately pull up all the necessary specifications, data sheets, P&IDs, anything you need to be able to react to an event that may occur in the field during your operations. So there are many, many use cases and that we've identified, and I don't have time to obviously go through all of them, all the way from well planning, field development, all the way up to decommissioning. There's a couple that I'm going to point out. You'll have this slide in part of your deck that you've received, so there may be ones that you'll be more interested in looking at. But we have integrated with a number of different popular software tools for doing things like field simulations. Obviously, I talked a lot about costing. I talked a lot about some planning type functionality through marine operations. So, but I do have a couple of brief use cases I want to talk about. One is field layout optimization. One of our clients is a global oil services company. Traditionally, they had a very siloed workflow. They used fairly basic tools to do this kind of work, Visio and Microsoft Paint, those kind of tools, and Excel, which were not connected together. They're simply just tools that and then when meetings came together, they were printed out and have lots of paper on the table, which created a very slow, laborious process looking something along these lines, where you have all these different silos of information, and everything takes a long time to get approved. So today, now they work within the digital twin concept. Everything is brought together into a single environment. This could be on a large screen or on a tablet, like an Aegex tablet. It would depend on the context of the user, and being able to see at any time any data associated with the project that they're working in. They work everything in the cloud. If anybody wants to see a cost, immediately they can have access to the cost. Those people, you can control who has access to the cost, and who has the ability to make changes, updates, or revisions to the data. But the point is, the digital twin provides the mechanism to allow everybody to access the true project at any time, from anywhere, on any device. And some of the savings are incredible. You know, it will tend to be a little bit based on the size of the project. But projects that in the past, to get to an EPC stage, may have taken several months, can be rapidly conceptualized in maybe a day or a couple of days, and then various process would be put together to turn that into a bid, of course. But acceleration from 30 to 80% is not unusual. And so and also reducing the costs, simply because you're reducing the amount of iterations. You're also removing the need to involve complex engineering process, CAD engineering type process, because everything is being drawn and put together in a digital fashion from the beginning, and bringing all the data in that you have and all the process that you have, connecting it to various systems that you might use for, say, simulations, allows you to make very, very rapid decisions to know if a concept field is likely to be viable, and to rapidly move to EPC. So the second use case I'd like to talk about is around a regional operator around marine operations. And this actually is a client we've had for some time, one of our earlier clients, and one of the reasons why we actually developed this software. They had a lot of planning conflicts when the vessels were being planned out. They couldn't. There was no easy way to track where scheduling, how they did their scheduling. They had issues around safety zones and the size of safety zones, so that they would often run into issues and conflicts with their safety zones. There was a lack of data available to them, so they didn't necessarily know who was available at what time, and that resulted, of course, in idle vessels and huge costs associated with those. So their old system, their Gantt charts and everything else, really didn't cut it. And so they were able to build a digital field, a digital twin of their field, which they could then completely visualize in the cloud in real time and make those decisions. So they could bring in vessels, 3D versions of their vessels, accessing live information about the location of those vessels, anything else associated with the vessels, and be able to plan, pre-plan, as well as see in real time during the actual marine operation phase how efficient they're running and how close they are running to plan. So that's a real success story on the marine operations side. They've saved a huge amount of money because of the day rate costs that they managed to reduce. Of course, there's a lot of risk associated with planning these kind of events and being able to intervene prior to the collision of a vessel with another vessel, or other sort of catastrophic issues become something that's sometimes like inquantifiable, but certainly the liabilities associated with it have been reduced significantly, and increased accountability. They know where more stuff is at any time. There's a concept called custody transfer you may be aware of, where there is a huge amount of loss in the industry because of lack of accountability. So having that insight and knowing when fluids, oil is being loaded and offloaded, what the quantity is, everything else, is an area that they absolutely are interested in exploring further. So that's just a very brief introduction to what we call the digital twin. I talked about creating a twin, using digital tools, doing everything in the cloud in a collaborative environment, working with your employees as well as your partners and other specialists to bring everything together quickly to save you time and money and reduce your risk. However, one of the challenges is less about technology and more about the process of committing to it. And digital transformation is a challenge, and most fail, according to IDC, because there is not enough communication within the organization. People like the way they have always done it. So, you know, if you have a break in the chain of the siloed data, in other words, you say, well, this piece of data we won't bring in. Well, that could be the critical piece of information that you need to make a decision in the future. So, you know, not investing the time to integrate with the right systems, not managing the project well, and not having access to the right data. You know, there are a number of reasons why these projects fail. And in the end of the day, it's about people, it's about the culture within the organization. It has to be something that's a sort of a top-down type of approach. People have to be willing to change the way they operate and the way their mindset is, and be open to the way that this kind of technology can change the way that companies can be successful. And there's so many stories of companies that have failed because they've failed to transition to something new, and great examples like Blockbuster and various other companies, of course, are ones we all know about. And the same can be said about companies within this industry. So in conclusion, we talk about digital transformation. It's critical to have this collaboration. It gives you the benefit of the right information at the right time to increase communication and decision making. Being in the cloud is a standard operating system today for most industries. It's something the oil and gas industry has always been a bit nervous about because they fear security, but the reality is the cloud is the most secure environment you can be in. Google and Amazon and Microsoft have all the best security guys working constantly on their environment to ensure that everything is always encrypted and secure. And everything needs to be digital. Everything needs to be off the paper and into the digital environment, driving all these cost savings, accelerating your ability to get to market, and improving the way you work across the board, which of course ultimately will improve the performance of your company and your profitability. So on that note, that's my last slide. Yeah. On that note, I will hand it back to Rebecca and/or Lee.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Darrell.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. We do have a couple of questions from the audience. The first one is, how do the companies you work with get the buy-in from their senior executives? In my organization, there's a constant focus on cost and asking, do we really need to do this?
Oh, absolutely. And that is actually probably one of the biggest challenges we have. I'm finding more and more companies do recognize that digital is the way to go. And if they're hiring at the senior level, I mean, there's a new job title that sort of emerged over the last couple of years called the Chief Digital Officer, the CDO. And companies that invest in somebody like that have recognized that this problem is an area that they want to invest in. You know, ultimately, yes, it costs money to invest in these kind of tools. It costs money to retrain people. But if you want to be competitive, the company has to ultimately make the decision that they want to move into this environment because their competition is. And but it is absolutely a tops-down decision. It has to be a mandate from the organization. So if your organization isn't mandating it, then you know, they may miss out and they may not reap the benefits of some of these changes that need to happen.
Thank you. Also, there's another question here. It says, I saw your display at the OTC 2018 show, but didn't have time to stop and talk. Can you explain how the Aegex IoT sensors work with FutureOn software?
Yeah, I mean, I know less about the IoT sensors than I do about our software, but certainly the way that we were demonstrating that, we had a live setup, if you like, a representation. There was a pedestal which contained, which had a number of sensors, as well as the ability to change the temperature, as well as send humidity. So that was a self-contained environment, but that was connected over the internet, over the cloud, to a presentation of the field itself. So the field was live, and then when certain sensors, we said, okay, we're going to effectively connect this sensor to that asset, and when that sensor raised above a certain temperature, or whether the humidity was too high, we would then identify that asset, present it on the screen, and show it in red to say this asset has exceeded a value being tracked by this sensor has exceeded the value you set as your threshold, so it requires some sort of intervention. So that's how we have it. That's how we set it up within that. But basically, everything's over the internet. Everything runs over TCP/IP. So we're basically a cloud-based solution. So there's no special protocol that we have to use. We just connect to the devices through the connectivity tools that are available and through our API that we make available. So, you know, how you set up your environment yourself with sensors and the data streams becomes very configurable. You know what you care about. Everybody cares about different aspects of operations. They want to monitor different aspects of their setup, and so it's a solution that becomes highly configurable to your specific set of use cases.
Lee, I think as a quick adder to that, I know we're a bit over time, but the sensors that were there, obviously, weren't tracking toxic or volatile gases there in the convention hall. So the things that were being monitored were intentionally innocuous, but the key part is to be able to take a facility, a subsea facility, bring oil to the surface, loading it to a vessel, monitoring how those conditions then in a live environment rather than just simply in a design environment. And I think going back to the previous question, how do those costs get justified and so forth? That it's you can't kill all the birds with one stone, but you can start to see how as you're aggregating data and you're capturing information, moving that into a usable format so a broader range of people have access to the information that's specific to their needs, but then also moving it into an operational environment. So we're adding a different element to that knowledge base. It's facilities are running safely, leaks are not being detected, we're getting flow rates calculated more accurately, whatever it may be. So we're augmenting the design concept now with an operational real world environment.
Thank you. And there's just one last question. Are you conducting any proof of concept trials that we could possibly participate in?
We've got, you want to go?
Go ahead, Tom.
All right.
Go ahead.
We've got a couple different projects that the two of us are working on later this summer and into the fall, and kind of understanding what the specific needs are of the individual customers and so forth, or in a couple of cases where maybe several organizations working together to understand how easily this gets implemented, how quickly, and how can start to kind of drive some of those efficiencies, and where's that real core focus. So certainly if there's somebody that's interested and wants to talk about either being a part of one of those or handling something individually, I think that would be a great opportunity for us to talk through.
Yep. and it goes to the fact that, these are configurable tools. This isn't like a traditional software that's like, this is how you work it. This is something that has to be configured to meet the needs of your environment specifically, which is why working with companies that recognize the value of this kind of technology is very useful for us.
Wonderful. Well, with that, thank you both very much, and thank you all for joining. We will see you next time on the next Aegex webinar. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you.